is Antonio Moore coming to you from Tonetalks, here with the wonderful Yvette Carnell from Breaking Brown. We're here to have a good discussion, a healthy discussion about affirmative action, about the history of African Americans in this country, and the reality of where people such as Senator Kamala Harris and President Barack Obama place inside of that. I wanted to give Yvette Carnell a chance to say hello to the audience. Yvette, you want to say something?
No, I just want to say, hey, Breaking Brown family, what's up?
Yeah, and I just want to say, please go to tonetalks.org.
Brown.com. You can donate there, get the newsletter there, do whatever you got to do at the Breaking Brown homepage.
And go to tonetalks.org to subscribe, donate, read my old articles, and then also to donate to this channel so that we can continue to bring you the breaking news, our analysis on the breaking news, and expand the discussion for African Americans. You know, today what I want to do is I want to cover 4 different kind of topic areas. Some of it might be redundant for a few of you guys, but some of it is kind of new in context of things that have recently come out. We're going to cover Mindy Kaling's brother. That's Mindy Kaling of the Mindy Project, formerly on Fox, the sitcom on Fox, moved to Hulu. She's an Indian young woman that had a sitcom of some sort, and her brother actually faked being African American to get into medical school and had certain views about affirmative action as a result. We're going to also talk about Harvard's new admission numbers. Supposedly they're up from 11.5% or 11.6% African Americans to 14.4%, I believe, percent. And I wanted to discuss that as well. I want to talk about Trump's attacks on African Americans and Trump's attacks on affirmative action and the reality of how diversity has allowed an opening for him to do that. And the last thing, of course, is to contextualize President Obama and Senator Kamala Harris in amidst it all, and what the cost of being black in America historically means inside of black families, and whether these two individuals represent the true lens to see people who have not had that cost bearing the most beneficial place inside of affirmative action. So recently we've seen with Mindy Kaling's brother that he got into medical school by shaving his head and shaving his eyebrows of some sort to look more quote-unquote African American, and then did an expose of sorts along with a book talking about how that allowed him access into some of the top like medical schools, whereas he wouldn't have got admission as an Indian. What's your opinions on that, Yvette?
I mean, it just shows him. I mean, this was the greatest lens for me to see through. Like, people say, well, we're all in it together, and we're all people of color. And it's just like, no, this guy is using his complexion to access something that was intended, and written and triggered by the civil rights movement in this country. And so he's using that in a way that's detrimental to African Americans, that cuts African Americans out of our own struggle. And he's writing a book about it, and he's using that to say we don't need African American because that's cutting me out. And what he's also saying is, dude, I look just like you. I can be black too. Because we've made being black just about skin color or nappy hair as opposed to heritage and lineage in this country. And that's what happens when you do that, when you're that kind of confused that you don't understand how you're supposed to distinguish yourself as a people.
I agree, and I think that one of the things that Indians, and these are the Indians from India, which is considered part of Asia, allow us to do is really see the confusion of actually surrounding this around color, surrounding this around a landmass like Africa, rather than the history of being enslaved in this country. Meaning affirmative action, reparations, and the discussion of who should bear the brunt of benefit from being black in this country, and who is owed for being black in this country. Here you have a group that actually physically is brown, but structurally has no cost of being from slavery, but they're not the only group. Many groups from Africa bear the same exact reality, but somehow we're able to see this most vividly through this brother being what I call honest about what he did. Whereas there's a social dishonesty from groups such as where Obama came from, which is East Africa, a Kenyan, where they're considered black just like us, and in the end, we end up bearing the brunt of the cost. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think we end up, and that's something that we don't talk about. Like, when we talk about this person is black just like me, we don't talk about, no, the reason that we're supposed to get this is because we bear the cost. And so it's actually kind of despicable for me for this person that I don't care, like you first generation or whatever, to come here and be like, see, these African Americans are getting something that I can't get in terms of college when you didn't bear the cost. You're not supposed to get it. You're not supposed to get it because you didn't bear the cost. So you're making a book about how you didn't get it. What you're supposed to really do is just say, I didn't get into that school, and go and get into another school. You're not supposed to come here and do what he did. And so what I think he proved, unintentionally, is that you're not an ally. And a lot of people who look like you and who have brown skin pretend to be allies of African Americans, but the only thing they really want is what we fought and gained and gave them access to. They don't really want to be us. They really want to take what we gave access to, and essentially what ends up happening is we get locked out.
Yeah, and I believe that what we don't understand, because one of the arguments that comes out is, don't we all look the same? Don't white people treat us all the same? And what we don't understand is that none of that matters. We're owed this and much more. And I think that what we don't understand is that by creating a space where somebody like President Obama, which we'll get to later, gets to compete in against descendants of slavery while having all of the access and privilege of being white through inheritance, through networks, through relationships, it actually creates the perfect opening for people like Trump to make the argument, why should affirmative action exist?
Yep. And
damages us. I mean, and it's true. I mean, if you inherit $500,000 as President Obama did, you should get no access, in addition to not coming from slavery, missing Jim Crow, you should get no access to any additional benefit. And if you look at Obama, then he doesn't get into Harvard. He just doesn't. He had, I know that he would have had the legacy, but his grades were not there to get into Harvard. And, we'll get into details, but I think that we got to go back to the term African American. It was created for the progeny of slavery. Before the mid-'80s, late '80s, it wasn't even used as a term. And I think the fundamental flaw when Jesse Jackson created this is it was surrounded around a landmass rather than a struggle and a history in this specific country of America. And so what it's done is created a confusion that's allowed affirmative action and the concept of reparations to be bastardized. And that confusion has allowed people who have literally nothing owed by America to claim that they have something owed by being black in America.
Yeah, I think we need a new term, because what you just said is so true. People are coming over here and taking advantage of the fact that they are a minority or they are also African American. And we should be called something else. Like I always talk about descendants of slaves, but we should be called something else. And people who come here from other countries, you should call yourself Nigerian American. You should call yourself Ghanaian American. And we should call ourselves something else to differentiate who we are when we apply for benefits in this country, as opposed to just saying, well, we all come from the same place. And I get a lot of heat for saying, I'm not a Pan-Africanist in that sense, because I'm not connected to a landmass. That's not something, I'm not connected to this. And we're all, African Americans in this country are mixed up, racially because of a lot of reasons. We're not, what are you telling me? I'm connected to a continent. I mean, think about how stupid that is. Connected to a whole continent. It's over 50 countries in Africa. Most people who say that don't even know where they're from. They haven't even traced their lineage. They have no relationship there, and you're still going back there. And what that means is that you're basically making yourself into a perpetual outsider, where you don't feel that you have an investment or a justice claim in this country because you're going to go back to Africa at some point. Now, mind you, and it's all, and I agree that a lot of what's happened there is because of American imperialism or European imperialism and destabilization and colonization. But what we have here is like you are hearkening to a third world country to be your savior. No, your savior's right here. Your country's right here. You live in the richest country in the world right here. This is the country that we have a claim to.
And I have to agree, and I would add in, what's actually ironic is that we know that we can omit almost all of Africa from our connection because we're really all from West Africa. And it's important because our supposed first black president came from East Africa and literally has little to no cultural connection to us. And I think that what ends up happening as a result is that we can't go back to Kenya, but he can come to Africa and America if it was a place. And so like fundamentally, it creates a one-way street for somebody who already is inheriting $500,000 from their grandmother. So you're in a perfect position to take advantage of me, and I'm in no position to ask anything of you. And then when you get elected, you do nothing for me. And I think for so many African Americans, we can't see the enemy beyond Bull Connor, Donald Trump, and George Bush. We can't see the enemy within our own house that actually is creating some of the most destructive parts of what leads to our failures, whether purposefully or not. And that enemy comes in our face often. And so, like, it's interesting because you shared this, and I wanted to share a small section. You can go to Yvette Carnell's last show, and she shared a section of this, but it's a great article. Pull it up. How immigration distorts affirmative action policy on CNBC, and it kind of lays out this very argument that we're making. And this isn't even like a complex argument. It's just a given that black people suffered from hundreds of years of slavery in this country, along with 100 years of oppression post-slavery. And I think that it's even into today with mass incarceration. And I've made the argument in my last video that we should require the data to see how many black males that are over incarcerated in these prisons have two parents that come from or descend from slavery. And I believe that it'll be very, very high. I believe that it'll be the disproportionately large majority of the sample. And that what that means is that slavery is producing prisoners. And I think we have to deal with that. But let me share a small section of this article. Then I'll allow Yvette Carnell to chime in on what this professor was saying. And what it says is, immigrants from around the world, and I'm going to pull this article up for you so you can follow a little bit, are increasingly coming to America. Those patterns have made that perennially unpopular topic, diversity initiatives in higher education, harder to promote at a time when support is flagging. The education gap between blacks and the broader society has narrowed appreciably, yet still lags at a time when data suggests overall U.S. middle class achievement and the middle class, black middle class in particular, has been stymied by the Great Recession. However, at least one academic argues that changing demographics make a case for more affirmative action. When affirmative action started, this is a quote from a professor, Kevin Brown, law professor at the Indiana University's Moore School. When affirmative action started, 99% of the blacks in the country were native born. The assumption was that you'd be helping black descendants of slavery and segregation through the program. Brown says the influx of non-whites from places such as the Caribbean, Africa, and Latin America has complicated the use of preferences in higher education. So I wanted you to chime in on that point that he's making.
Well, here's the thing. As it's currently written, affirmative action is unsustainable. And if I was a white man, I would be upset too. Because the thing is, it has it to where if you're a white woman, if you're anything but a white man, you have access to something that he doesn't have access to. And really, it should be designated for people who have a specific claim. Because if you have it just for African Americans who are descendants of slaves, if it goes to the Supreme Court or wherever, you're not just making the argument that they're making now. The argument that they're making now is, well, affirmative action is good because we need diversity on campus. That's bull. It's not intended for that. It's intended to make up and correct for a justice claim, for us not getting, for us being enslaved, and then Jim Crow, and then Reconstruction, and white people destroying white mobs, and the KKK. It's intended for that. It's intended to give us back to give us a doorway into corporate America, education, all that. It was never intended to just have diversity on campus. So it is doomed to fail unless it is reverted back to just African Americans.
So and what's the trip is that's the intention, right? But what it's actually resulted in is that it's jet fueled the potential of these new immigrants in a highly competitive America. So I always hear from new immigrants that, you know, whether it be new immigrants from Asia, such as Koreans, Japanese, whether it be immigrants from Africa, from Nigeria, and the like, that we're just better at school. Well, it's not just a matter of being better at school. It's being better at school and then being able to compete against a group that was not allowed to go to school until relatively recently historically. I don't think that Black America understands what other groups were benefiting from while your family was enslaved. I don't think Black America understands what other groups were not cut out of while your family was culturally castrated. Even when you look at the type of slavery that was enacted in Haiti and Jamaica, it wasn't the cultural castration that you saw here in America. So you were able to ground yourself with language still, with community. It wasn't the purposeful devastation of family in the same way. And I think that for all of this, there's just not been enough discussion. and the major like people that have carried that burden are descendants of African American slavery, the descendants of American slavery, because what has ended up happening is that we get all the cost of America's losses, and then other groups get all the gains. You look at the new lady hired by Uber. She's hired by Uber because she's supposed to represent overcoming slavery and Jim Crow. That's what her role is. She's just a brand manager. She wasn't hired as a high-level engineer that knows how to somehow do an application that nobody else technically knows how to do. She was hired because she looks like a descendant of American slavery and represents that progress, and then can go back to these communities in the Deep South that have large Deep South and throughout like Chicago and everywhere and say they're okay to black people too. And she doesn't represent that. And
so what you go to is what we talk about. She masks our failure. She's up there and they say, oh, in essence, and everybody will say, oh, look at this black woman, black girl magic. And you don't understand. She don't even come from where you come from. She don't even have the same background. African Americans aren't over there at Uber. And you got to understand this too. She's not even in the organizational chart. She don't have no power. She's just there to make Uber look less racist. She's there to make them look nicer in terms of, so you don't think about how they've destroyed labor in this country. That's what she's there for. So really, when you look at it, she's a big part of the problem, and she's nothing to be celebrated. But we look at her and we see a black face, and that's all we need to see, a black face. And we say, oh, a black woman doing her thing. No, we have to go beyond the black face and really talk about the tribes that we have and who we are. And we have to be honest. You don't have no power. You're nowhere in the organizational chart. You're a brand person. That is nothing in terms of the power of a company and what that company can do. I had somebody tell me, well, she's going to change the culture. You don't change the culture as a brand manager. You disguise it. That's what you do. And that's what she's there for, to make Uber look not as bad as Uber.
And the other thing we have to deal with is people say like Irmi, and Irmi's addressed this, that have one parent that's from Africa and one parent that is a descendant of slavery. I don't think that we are honest enough about how often you're able to then ground yourself in the parent that is from Africa and recreate your entire cultural narrative. And I think that, we've seen the evaluation done by Native Americans. So I don't understand why it's so complicated to kind of value coming from descendancy of slavery. And by not valuing it, we've created a lostness that should never have existed, given the fact that we're still here in this country and there's still documents that can connect people and show what value, what people's direct connections is. It's almost as if we want to ignore American slavery. And so, like, for me, when I look at somebody like Issa Rae, and I've heard this critique, well, she's not just Senegalese, she's half African American. Well, the problem for me is my parents had me at 16. One's from Alabama, the other one's from Mississippi. And in many ways, that riveted throughout my life. Both are high school educated. But I have to look over at Issa Rae with two professional parents that did I believe grew up partially in Senegal, then was moved to like East Coast white America, then was moved to like higher end Ladera, and we're the same. And somebody would say, well, black people live like that all the time. Well, you tell me then why the middle black family is worth $1,700. You go review my interviews with Thomas Shapiro, who wrote the book Black Wealth, White Wealth. My interview with Sandy Darity, who actually is one of the leading economists in the world in the terms of race, and my interview with Byron Allen, where he says African America is amidst genocide, descendants of American slavery. And you tell me how she is the same as me. And I think that my story rivets throughout America, throughout African American realities, while hers does not. But everybody needs an escape, so they create this reality where we're the same because she's half, when in actuality, what you find is that person grounds themselves in the part that's not lost. That Senegalese part. That Guyanese part.
And that's what we see when we watch her show, right? You see her, it's almost, when you see her, it's almost like, and we've talked about this before, like she's a black woman in African American face. It's not like you're immersed in that. And I want to compare, like, the thing is, I would compare her, and we always talk about, what people do to help people. And people talk, we got to support black women. Yeah, nobody came out in numbers to support Monique, but they want to wear a shirt that says phenomenal woman, right? So it's such a problem. Even when you look at the comedy, even when you look at, like, a Monique's comedy, and you look at her comedy, where she's basically talking about rap lyrics and trying to play like a rapper, as opposed to being a person who is like, enmeshed in that community and is a part of that and came up from that. And so it's almost as if, as African Americans, we're so desperate. We want to see something exotic. We want to see something new. We want to see somebody rich. We want to see somebody who didn't come up like us, because that makes us feel better. And they take advantage of us basically not having any self-esteem.
Yeah, and I think that, the tragedy of it all is that black stories don't get told anymore. We love the exotic now, and basically we've been enmeshed into diversity across the board to the point where we don't know that our stories aren't being told. Not a lot of people now grew up on Good Times, on Sanford and Son. So like what they really think is that these are African American stories when they're stories of diversity. And I don't think that if there's going to be a slot after all of the white shows, that it should go to a slot for diversity. I want to see African American stories. Show me a family in the Deep South. Show me a black family in the Deep South. Where's that show? And somebody would say, well, Oprah has a show like that. No, Oprah's channel and HBO is two different channels, two different reaches. And I think that for a lot of us, what has started to happen is that we're okay being smashed into a corner that we never should have been in. Meaning African Americans, descendants of slavery. I'm going to get to it towards the end of this discussion, just to kind of keep you guys coming along. But I want to re-envision. There's a new series supposedly being done by the creator of Boondocks, along with Will Packer, about what would happen with reparations if black people got reparations. I want to explain to you how I see it. And I'm gonna let Yvette chime in towards the end. But you have to understand that it's not just a matter of giving us a 40 acres and a mule. It's not the value. What that would have done is place black America in a whole nother class in America. That's what was happening during Reconstruction. Our families would be in the top 10% of families in this country and would have been in the room. For those of you that like for those of you that like Game of Thrones, for whatever reason, I'm not saying that's wrong. Right now, we below the wildlings. That's where we came from, descendants of American slavery. They don't even have the form of slavery that they show on Game of Thrones isn't even close to what American slavery was. And so right now we have American we come from American slaves, but we don't realize that we could have been in the room had reparations been given. When I say in the room, one of the people that were in the room when John Stark talks and everything and make sure our interests were met. And our interests were known, and that everybody wasn't out to take advantage of us during redlining, Jim Crow, mass incarceration. You're not going to mass incarcerate my people. You're going to have to do it to somebody else.
Yeah, and I think part of that problem is that African Americans want to be good to everybody. And I understand that from a theoretical perspective in terms of solidarity and the solidarity narrative. The problem is that you can't be good to everybody when nobody's good to you. At a certain point, when this is your life, you have to take morality out of your politics. And or you have to extend morality to your group the most. So the people who get that extension of empathy are the people in your group. That's something that you have to do, but it's almost like that's something that we haven't learned in terms of how we have to navigate politics. So you come in here and you say everybody gets treated fairly. Well, that's not how capitalism is working, and that's not how capitalism has ever worked. And that's not how people who are coming into this system are working. They don't see you. Somebody who comes here from an African country doesn't necessarily see you as a brother or a sister, because they compete with other Africans every day, and they know how to compete with black people. That's just part of the game, and they've learned how to play the capitalism game. It's not like 1960, where you had a bunch of African nations getting their freedom, and there was really some potential. You see it differently now. You see people who are like, I'm going to get mine. I come from a poor country, and if it means taking your stuff to get what I got to get, that's what I'm going to get. And that means we have to fight, but we're not in a space where we understand that we have to compete against people who look like us, but they are.
Let's make this more visual. Harvard released this data. I think it was, last year their admit numbers were 11.4% for quote-unquote African Americans, and now it's up to, I believe, well over 14.6%. The problem is that they're largely including new Africans, Caribbeans, as the sample, and also biracials, which means you have a white parent and thus, just like Obama, inherit the privilege of having a white parent. And I think that the problem isn't that those people exist. The problem is that what they do is they omit and erase the entire reality that black America is basically made up of people who don't have that reality and are really owed those spots. And so, like, what do I mean? Henry Louis Gates did a study maybe about 8-10 years ago where he actually broke down the Harvard admit numbers and showed that 2/3 of the class that year was new African and Caribbean and biracial. 2/3. So while you create this reality that you have diversity and you've corrected slavery and Jim Crow, because that's what happens when you say black people are getting in reality you've just replaced the group. Now the larger consequence is that in the end the people that come out are like President Barack Obama, and they don't really act on the interest of the group of African Americans. Now you could say, well, African Americans also may not act on the interest of African Americans, such as Clarence Thomas. But your shot is way larger. History has just laid that out. When you look at, let me give you an example. When you look at incarceration across this globe, the places that are the most homogeneous have the lowest incarceration rate. The places like America that are the most diverse have the highest. And the people that go to prison the most are considered the most undesirable. Here, that's African American males. No matter what anybody wants to say. And I want to say, I believe it's largely descendant of slavery African American males. Because nobody wants to send their own grandma or mom or auntie or brother to prison. But if they're this other, then that's okay. And I think that for a lot of us, what started to happen is that we don't understand that we're the ultimate other. And we don't understand that we can't compete if we're trying to include everybody inside of not being the other when we view things, because we were framed that way after I Have a Dream and all and how the civil rights was contorted into this diversity message where everybody gets a chance. When everybody getting a chance after we bore slavery means that you're cut out, And then
not only everybody gets a chance, you're gonna say, well, I can compete. How can you compete? You don't even know, you'll talk about an immigrant, not even know where the immigrant comes from. And you'll say, I can compete. Well, wait a minute, you don't know, Kamala's mom, they come from an upper caste. And they had access to different things that you never had access to because of your history. And they had access to schools and good education and people around them who were professionals and academics going back generations. How foolish is it for you to say you can compete? The affirmative action is because we can't compete on that level just yet, and because racism against African Americans is such a part of who this country is. They won't let us in without it. So it's supposed to be a way to tell corporations, schools, let African Americans in. And so what they're basically saying is, I'm still not going to let you in. I'm going to let in other people who look like you.
Let's go a step further than that, just so people don't attack that statement. We were designed not to compete. That's I don't think that people understand what slavery means. It was an institution where our a wealth that's in this country was designed on us being that wealth. I think it's too multidimensional for a lot of people to understand that. So what you get is these arguments from new immigrants, well, we're just better students. Of course, you didn't go through slavery. It's not about being a better student. It's about the reality that you weren't here to experience why we're not better students. It's the reality that you weren't here to experience the reality of having mothers and fathers and grandfathers stripped from home. And then to come here after that and just say, I'm a better student. It is the utter disrespect to everything that is America. And we've allowed this to happen. We allowed President Barack Obama to go to Morehouse and speak to those young boys that way. Those graduates.
Yep.
Things ain't fair. You right, Obama. Things ain't fair. But it was extra fair for you when your grandmama left you that $500. And so now where we're at is in a country where America's saying, well, it's okay now. Well, you tell me why 10% of African American males are incarcerated when you're not supposed to be above 0.1%. A normal rate is 0.1%. It's not okay. That group has to go to jail to feed the system, because if they were asking for jobs too, we'd be in cataclysmic collapse. And I think we don't understand that slavery is still here. It's just in the lives of our sons and brothers that come from slavery. And we don't understand what that means going forward, as you have to start paying for anklets when somebody else is paying for houses. And when I say anklets, I mean parole anklets, because they don't want to hold them no more. They want to bring them out of the system, incarcerate them, tag them and flag them, and then have you pay for an anklet to watch them. That's an extension of American slavery. Yeah. And I think that, this whole idea, well, then they shouldn't commit crimes. Everybody committing crimes. It's just some crimes are actually prosecuted. And so, like, child support is an example. It's mothers and fathers not paying child support, black and white.
And Oxy is a good example. When we look at the opioid epidemic, it's all kind of. We've seen articles about drug stores who are basically acting as drug dealers, and people taking these drugs and obtaining them illegally, but they aren't getting the same. They aren't getting that. We don't see a mass incarceration epidemic. We see too many people jailed for sure, but you don't see any kind of incarceration on the level of what happened to black men. That just goes to show you, yeah, everybody's doing it, but only one group is being prosecuted to the full extent of the law all the time.
Yeah, because you need somebody to actually feed the system, create those jobs, get out of the system, and stop asking for employment, and give you a valid reason to say they're out of the system. And then you also use them for cheap labor, like what Kamala Harris did as far as paying them $1.75 to fight fires. Usually a firefighter is paid $100,000 and given a pension. But when you get them out of jail, you can pay them $1.75, and if they die, they die in the fire. And we don't even really got to report the data like that. No one cares. And this is Senator Kamala Harris's office that did that. And so, for me, I look at what Trump is doing. Let's move to Trump's attacks on affirmative action. And he has threats to redirect resources of the Justice Department to investigate and sue universities over affirmative action policy. The exact language I want to make sure I get in here is investigations and possible litigation related to intentional race-based discrimination in college and university admissions. So understand what that means for African Americans particularly, who actually rely on and need this resource more than anybody else, that the fruit tree is bare, and that they're tired of handing out all of these benefits, but they still haven't actually corrected anything that's in your family. And actually, in many ways, made it worse. Because we didn't go to prison like that after slavery. We didn't go to prison like that in Jim Crow. But now we go to prison and we get back young boys that are largely broken and institutionalized. And we have to now feed them and house them with no resources while paying for anklets.
Yeah, and that's how they're handing out benefits. When you take that comment further, that's how they're handing out benefits to all of these groups. You handing out benefits to all these groups in the name of diversity. It's just stupid. So you get to the point where it's like it's indefensible. If it was just handing out benefits to one group for one failing, Ann Coulter is a right-wing person. I don't share her politics at all. But even she said we owe African Americans. We don't owe every group that crosses the border, and that's just the truth. This country owes us. It doesn't owe everybody. It doesn't owe, the thing that triggered this affirmative action was the civil rights movement. And so now you have people coming over and just getting our due. And African Americans are so unwilling to upset the apple cart or compete with anybody or say, no, I'm here, I'm part of this group and I'm part of this group, and differentiate ourselves, that we end up getting nothing. Everybody else understands that they're competing, and they do it in a very slick way. We're the only ones who want to take in all strays.
And I would say so willing to upset the apple cart that they don't realize there's about to be no apple cart. And I think that for a lot of us, what we don't understand is the reality of what African Americans should have. We think of it in this, and I would say minor sense, that it's a reparations payment. No, it's a repositioning of your structural position in America. It would put what happened is we invested in a country that was rising like no other, one of the richest countries in the history of the world at the beginning. And so for people who say isn't all slavery the same, people were in Haiti and Jamaica, those countries didn't become America. And I think that we don't understand from a legal standpoint, the large argument is that that the people who actually went through slavery are dead. Well, I think that you can draw a strong parallel. So the people that went through slavery are dead, so the issue is moot. It's late. Well, they weren't allowed to bring suit. So I think a large parallel can be drawn between that and what's happened in prisons, where they toll the claim. Because if you're in prison and say there's a statute of limitations, they toll it for a certain amount of time because you were incarcerated. You couldn't bring a lawsuit. Well, this is worse than that. This should be a tolled claim. And then in addition, to bring a claim, it has to be a specific person damaged or family damaged, And it has to be a specific claim. If you look at Haiti, they would have to, those Haitians would have to bring a claim against French people for what they lost. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about building America for free and America becoming a billion trillion dollar country. You have to understand the reality of the amount of wealth in this country. And white people have 90% and black people have less than 2.6% of that wealth. And that includes the new Africans. I don't even know what the numbers would look like with just descendants of slavery. Because if you look in LA, the middle Nigerian is worth $75,000 according to a new report by The Color of Wealth by Sandy Darity. Check it out. I'm pulling it up right now. And the middle black family is worth $200 liquid. $200 liquid. So if you took out these new Africans, we don't even have 2.6%. We might be below 1%. And the reality of why that's important is that because we have something, or it looks like we have something, it looks like we had a black president, we don't complain about the reality that the reason we don't have nothing is because we were stolen from and came from slavery. We just say, well, we just need to try harder to compete and become Obama too. And show little pictures of him hugging a black boy. No background. You know?
The one thing I'll say is that, like, I understand exactly what you're saying, because I used to be that person. I used to be that person who was just like, we're all in it together, we're all black, we gotta help each other, and I used to be that person in a strong way, just all pro-immigrant, all that stuff. I used to be that person until I started looking at the data. Until I started looking at our data versus their data and thinking about what that means in terms of where we come from and what we have access to. So the one thing that I recommend before, as we move on, to end is, like, you have to just start seeing life through the lens of data. You can't see life through the lens of skin color, of who can hail a cab, and whether white people think that person looks black or not. You have to start seeing it through the data and seeing it through lineage. And once you change that, then you'll start seeing how we don't benefit.
And so, like, this last section, what we have to understand when we look at President Obama and Kamala Harris is they represent two forks of analysis of what the cost of not really understanding slavery and Jim Crow does. You have Obama who's half East African. Let's be specific. We as blacks come from West Africa. He comes from East Africa. That's a world apart. And so, like, you have him being East African, and then you have him being white. And not just any kind of white, top 15, top 10% white in terms of wealth. To the point where he inherited $500,000. Because you have to understand, his mom, he was the only child, and then as a result, he was his grandparents' only child, because I believe the mom was also an only child. So we don't even know what else he inherited on top of the $500,000 in stock. And so what that means is that he lived the privileged life of being white, running around Hawaii, and having his white grandma he could always call, even while in Chicago, for $800 in the 70s, while standing next to a black person that had to sell heroin on the corner. Brother.
And then telling the guys in Morehouse, no excuses. When Obama's resume was about half a page long, and like you said, he was running around asking grandmama for money because there's so many gaps in his resume. He wants to then tell black men that there are no excuses when he doesn't have any achievement to his life and he didn't go through anything.
Let's make this thing visual. Let's make this thing visual. I'm gonna pull up a chart, and I pulled it up for you guys before, but I'm gonna add one element. Watch this happen. Imagine if your family came after this yellow bar. You missed slavery, you missed Jim Crow. You don't have any of that in your family line. And you just came here after the Cosby Show. Imagine how easy it is to be black. And somebody would say, you get pulled over all the time. Do you really? If you at Harvard with a nice haircut, nice glasses, do you really? Imagine not having the lostness, having a language, having a home country. Imagine having direction. Meaning a specific goal. You're going to Harvard to change the water lines in your own city, tribes like area in Nigeria. That's what your goal is. See, like, I think for so many African Americans, what started to happen is that we just have a bunch of strivers that want to work at Amazon. Our best still don't even have a goal of helping the rest. The goal of the best is to be at Amazon or Google or Uber and help Uber take advantage of black people. That's not good enough for a race that needs much more. When I do this channel, I do this for free. I do this basically because I believe Black America needs to know the data. This is going to get big. You can be first or you can be last to listen. But when I tell you that the middle black family is $1,700, that's not complaining. That's just telling you something you ain't never heard before. You got to look in the mirror and tell me if you knew that yesterday. So you lived in a country for 30 or 40 years and you didn't know that white people owned everything? Let me show you the way. Go ahead. Yvette,
well, I think one of the things you got to point about Obama when you said like not getting pulled over at Harvard with a nice haircut, you also not getting pulled over because as Obama, as a Kenyan and a lot of African immigrants, you're very ingratiating to white people, and you know how to be ingratiating to white people, and you don't mind doing that. You don't have that spirit of protest. You know what? That one of the things that Sandy Darity said was that the reason a lot of schools like Africans as opposed to African Americans is because they don't push back. They're more docile. And so that's part of the reason when you do run into police, you don't have to deal with that because you're not coming from a community where you deal with that all the time, so you're sick and tired. You're not coming from that. This is new to you, and you're going to just go through this to get where you got to go. And you're going to do what you got to do in terms of kissing that police officer's butt or whatever, because this is just momentary for you. For us, this is life. We ain't got nowhere to go home to. We can't just, go home and call and tell people, I might come back home to Nigeria. We can't do that. And so that's why we react the way we react. We come up against the police, and we know it's been happening for years and years. I'm reading a book right now about 1919 and everything that's happening. Like, we know it. You don't have that history, so it's easier for you to be docile, and it's easier for you to tell black people, y'all have a chip on y'all's shoulder in terms of native blacks in this country. So that's part of it too.
Before I talk about Senator Kamala and start closing out, let me finish with Obama, and let's be more specific about that history. I'm gonna pull up a picture of Obama with his grandparents. Look at both of these grandparents. Don't look nothing like my grandparents. And again, understand that you would have to erase the granddaddy for me. And so you got these two white grandparents that allows Obama to reach back and basically not just have the advantages of being white, but he has the advantages of white people taking advantage of black people through them. So you got a guy who has the advantages of white people taking advantage of black people through bank loans and all of the sort that became the first black president. Think about it. And so, I want to make it more specific. And what you look at is you see that that the bank that the grandmother went and worked for, not only was she able to take advantage of the wins of affirmative action that our families fought for. What do I mean? So affirmative action, civil rights movement happens. Affirmative action allows Harvard, who was extremely racist before, to lower the doors, allow other people in. My father was not positioned. My father is a year or so apart from Obama. He didn't know his father. And he was not positioned to go to Harvard. Not due to his own actions, but due to coming from American slavery. Obama was, though, because his daddy was a Kenyan who went to Harvard, so he can check legacy. And his grandmama had money. So you have a guy who's perfectly positioned to take advantage of affirmative action. But you also have a grandmother who's at a bank in the late 60s and early 70s. A white grandmother who's able to also take advantage of the needs for these banks to have slots for white women to move up. And so, you look at this bank. This is why it's important to know history. And this bank was, I wanted to share with you a little bit about this bank. In 1893, with his brother-in-law Joseph Ballard and business partner Peter Cushman they founded the Bank of Hawaii. In 1897, it was chartered in the Republic of Hawaii. In 1877, Reconstruction was ending. They were shutting us out. And for the next 100 years, black people were shut out. But while we were shut out, his grandmother accessed the benefit of this through becoming that bank manager. So Obama was accessing the advantage of being white and not being shut out while we were shut out. And then telling us, why can't you do what I do? Or creating the imagery that you have potential to do what I did. And none of it's true. You look over at Kamala Harris, Senator Kamala Harris, she's half Indian and half Jamaican. Both parents are professionals. Both. But she's also grounded in the reality of being Indian. This is a statement by the auntie. I pulled it up last video. Let me pull it up for you to see now. So she also came in that same yellow bar, post-slavery and Jim Crow, but supposedly represents, and then she's been held out as this second black senator, female. She's held out as the accomplishment and the progress, instead of just being an Indian senator. We as black people don't understand that we've been hustled, we've been marginalized, and it's gonna get worse if we don't wake up. So I'll let you get the last word, Yvette, and start to close out.
Yeah, I think we don't understand that people take advantage of the fact that we're lost. People take advantage of the fact that we don't have any. I don't think you would find a bunch of other groups that would let you come to their country. I could not go to Nigeria and say, I'm Yoruba. They're going to be like, who? We can look at you.
Who you?
Yeah, me. Who are you? Who you? And I think they have every right to say that. But we have every right to say that too. So it goes both ways. And I don't think that we realize that us people have been able to come over and take advantage of us just being lost and us having no guidelines in terms of who we include and who we exclude. We just take in everybody. We don't have any guidelines in terms of how we moralize. We just say everybody deserves something and we go forward in that way. Now understanding that these people aren't going to bat for us. They are, a lot of them, taken away from us. They are getting what we should get. And to be fair, they should say, like, I would never go to Haiti if the Haitians did get some sort of affirmative action from the French and they were getting free education or something. I would never go over there and say, I need to get this too. I just wouldn't. Either I can pay for my school or I can't. I would never say, I get in because I have a better grade. Well, yeah, because look at what they're coming through. It's third world. Like, I can't come over there and be like, well, I'm African just like you, or I'm black just like you, so I won't. That's selfish. And I think we've given people permission to just come in and extract from us and leave us at the bottom.
And I think it's also, I mean, just think, you get, in America, you do get primary schooling. Like, to go to a third world country and then basically compare yourself to people who might not have had that access and say, I'm just a better student, is disrespectful to that group.
Yeah.
And I think that there's a comparative by the elite classes of some of these countries where they're coming here not teaching their kids what the group went through. I mean, you'll have a Nigerian, a Guyanese person whose parents aren't sitting them down and saying, while we're going to move there, I want you to respect their culture. I want you to understand what American slavery is. So many of them, I think Lovey was a great example. This is Lovey, the blogger, where their parents basically don't even teach them about American slavery. How do you come here and not teach your kids about American slavery? That should be one of the requirements.
And she said in a tweet, I thought everybody had a driver like me. I thought everybody had a driver. Now the difference is, and I said this before, the difference is she had a driver. In America, we were the driver. We were the butler. And you see us the same. You don't see that. You see us the same because we're black. No, she was the person who had the driver. We were the people who drove. I want to meet her driver. I don't need to meet her, and she doesn't need to get access to what I get access to as African American.
Yeah, and she should have to compete with the white man just straight up. She should be.
Honestly, just mark white on your application.
Yeah.
That's what you mark that.
Yeah, which is let's make it more simple. You should mark this space called normal. It's a space called normal where you didn't go through nothing. Here, you're not you're just competing. I guarantee you that Harvard admission would not be 2/3 African and Caribbean if they had to mark the box normal. That number will be substantially lower. Because when you mark that box normal, you also have to pay, things like Kushner paid, things like we've seen the head of, I believe, Disney pay, where you got to buy parts of the school to go. See, you don't got to pay that stuff when you park black because they actually have made that slot to deal with slavery, Jim Crow, and everything else. That's the problem. Now, I want to end on the last thing, and I'm going to ask your opinion and let you close out, but I'm going to say mine first. They have this new show coming out or being developed by the creator of Boondocks and Will Packer about what a black America would look like if we got reparations. My opinion is that I don't know if they're gonna be able to dig deep enough while being politically correct. Because I think everything will deal with black America having wealth, but not enough to deal with black America having class and hierarchy. And so when I say black America, I'm dealing with African American descendants of slaves. There's two different things I think would have happened if reparations was given. The first thing is it would have propelled a class of black people, arguably a large section, into the upper echelon of America when America was growing. So we would have true billionaires that owned resources all through the South. And so what it would have done is that if you came here like after 1980, you just be lower. You be below. I don't care what country you come from. I don't care if it's Haiti or Nigeria. Because these are not developed countries like this place. Because we're flat right now, everybody comes in at the same level as us, if not well above us, as shown with the Color of Wealth report. The second thing I have to say I think it would have done is that it would have allowed us to be in the room during discussions and not be omitted and be the underclass in every argument. You're not going to incarcerate our people. You're not going to put liquor stores in our community. We weren't in the room. We were shut out. Watch my discussion with Byron Allen. You can see it right here. And he'll talk about it. This is one of the 4 black billionaires. I'm not guessing here. I'm telling you that if reparations were given, you would have no need for affirmative action because we would have money. You would have less mass incarceration because black people wouldn't have to sell drugs to actually provide for themselves in underserved communities across this nation throughout the 80s. What you don't understand is without affirmative action, you don't have Obama and Kamala. You don't have them. See, like without black people, when black people got reparations, these people wouldn't come here and have jet fuel. They would come here and have to actually just compete against a flat land. That's a whole different ball game. You want to say your part?
Well, no, I just want to say, people say, well, I come here to compete. Well, no. Part of that, you get buoyed up. You don't compete as much as you get buoyed up by the stuff that we bought. We used to have quotas. Now we have affirmative action. We have a lot of stuff that you can mark, which helps you and gives you a leg up. You don't just come here to compete. And so, like you said, if that's taken away, what are you gonna do? And it would have been taken away if we had gotten reparations way back when we should have got it.
It would have never been created. It would have never been created.
Make us whole.
It would have never been created. Not just taken away. It just would have never been created. So you look at somebody like Lovey. I believe there was a school that opened up slots because it needed to allow access to African Americans that she went to, this elite school. You remember that?
Yeah.
There would have been no slots. You just go to the school you're supposed to go to in the neighborhood that you moved here to. I don't think we understand that if you open up the reality of how President Obama slid into Harvard with mediocre grades, that doesn't happen without affirmative action. Somebody would say, how do you know he has mediocre grades? He wasn't on honor roll leaving Claremont or wherever he went. Occidental, I apologize. So we know that the grade point was below a certain point, even though they won't release the data. That's not enough to get into Harvard. But it is enough to get into Harvard if you combine that with, we see you through the lens of urban black America that's descended from slavery. Oh yeah, and you also got a daddy that went to Harvard. We never had one of those, but let him in. You know, I'll end out on that. I always appreciate when you come in. Again, go to tonetalks.org and breakingbrown.com to subscribe and donate. Last word to Yvette Carnell. I believe this was a great discussion.
I think we close it up. I want to say hey to the Breaking Brown family, but I think we wrap that up.
All right, thank you so much.